All right, we're going to talk about Auth0 today. Has anybody heard of or used Auth0? One, a little bit, one, two. Good. Hopefully this will be something new. This is an authentication library for many platforms. And I started working with Auth0 for a presentation last year at an Android conference and learned how to use it for the Android platform, but there are many more platforms that it works with. So if you have side projects, if you have other things that need an authentication piece and you don't have to worry about writing it yourself, this may be a good solution for you. So identity made simple. There's some stats here that they claim from their website of how many millions of logins every day of customers and enterprises and businesses using Auth0. Several countries, enterprise customers. So they have the B2B, they have business to enterprise, they have identity and access management tools. Even since the presentation I gave last year, about 8+ months ago, they've added new pieces of connectivity, social logins, they've added other providers, Salesforce, all sorts of things that you can connect to so that they're basically the one-stop shop for authentication. So in terms of authentication, their identity platform, they also take care of the users, user management. So you can have these tools help you with the users in your system. There's also, I haven't looked into it much, but there's passwordless features. There's lock, which we'll get into. That's the primary authentication mechanism to unlock the features of your app or signing in. Brief password detection, that's also new. I haven't delved into that much, but I think it's interesting. And multi-factor authentication, I've dealt with that, not through Auth0, but in other ways. Has anybody ever used tokens or physical tokens they can put in your computer? Some go into phones as like a hardware token for that multi-factor authentication. So those are other options to help secure your authentication process besides just the username and password. There are other things you can do to make that process more secure. Okay, this slide reminds me, I've got some handouts here. I actually contacted the people at Auth0 to see if there are any freebies or discounts on some of their services. And what they sent me in return are some PDFs of like white papers and marketing materials. So might as well just pass these around. And you don't have to read them quickly. It's some facts on the various pieces of their system and all the options and offerings that they provide. So according to one of their brochures, today applications are kind of assembled instead of just written from the ground up. We're piecing together different pieces when we have an application. We want to have login, we want to process payments. Usually we don't write these all from scratch. Hopefully we don't, especially if they're not like in our wheelhouse. There are things that we plug and play, like some of our apps here, we have Facebook integration. We don't write our own social networking community. We integrate with Facebook or others. So very modular, and so a lot of plug and play, a lot of integration. And this is similar to Auth0. They have a lot of pieces that if you want this part of authentication or this, they have a huge suite to add. So in terms of adding Auth to your app, who's actually gone through and written some basic username and password authentication for Android or even iOS? Somebody gone through that process? Just let me know, what have you used to authenticate? Use a database, use a web server. In the back, for example, what have you used? Just a web server. Just a web server. There are lots of frameworks and libraries that can help you with this portion. Some apps may not even need authentication, but when you do, it's nice to have something that you can trust will work for your users. Just in terms of data breaches, how many data breaches were there last year? It seems like there were a ton, all sorts of big and small companies all over the world. So to have a separate provider that they focus exclusively on authentication and identity and access management, it might be a good way to go. All right, so for Auth0, there's a 4-step process here. Basically, you can create a free developer account, and then you choose identity providers. I'll show those here in a moment, like integrating with Facebook or log in with Google or LinkedIn or Twitter. Choose an SDK or Auth0 API. I'll show you a list of their SDKs that they have, whether it's Objective-C or Android or Swift or Node.js. And then you hook it up to your app or API. So on their website, they have this thing called Quick Starts as part of their documentation page. And there's 4 main apps that you can create in your profile. So the first, you can have a mobile or native app that can be hybrid or desktop apps. There's also the single page like AngularJS. Single page web apps are very front-end heavy with JavaScript. Traditional web apps, the traditional website with the backing server. Node.js is also in here. Or backend API authentication. These are scripts running on servers, kind of headless, so you don't visually interact with or see. But for example, who's worked with AWS before? Or done EC2 instances, different servers, and have them process? I mean, if you can imagine having like a video converter process in AWS where videos can be uploaded, they can be resized, they can have quality changes, and then upload those to your data store or your website. So if that process were hacked and just anybody in the world could just throw videos at you and have them all get converted, I think your AWS bill would be pretty high. So there are ways to ensure that back-end processes, that they also have some security and authenticate properly so that only the right things are coming into your system. Okay, so this screen here has 4 different app types, and I'll have 4 slides following that show the different technologies behind each one. So mobile native apps, we've got Android. There's also the hybrids like PhoneGap, Cordova. We've even got Chrome extensions, Swift, Xamarin, Windows things. Single page apps, jQuery. I haven't used a whole lot of front end. Are there any front end developers here? Not a whole lot. I know usually there's teams when you've got your apps working, usually you may have a companion website to go with it. So your teams may have your Android authentication. You may want the website component as well. Traditional web apps, there's quite a few technologies that they interact or integrate with. And the last one, the backend API, all sorts of things to choose from. These are more like the scripts, server processes. And behind each one of these circles on these slides I've shown you, each one you click on it on the website and it goes through this quick start, like a wizard experience. And you go and create your app and it's tailored to each technology. So I thought that was pretty impressive of how much attention they put into the different technologies. So Android demo app, I'll show a little app right here. And that's kind of a screenshot of the simple page I'll show you in a minute. But the authentication experience, there's 4 different flavors that they have for the login process. The one I'll be doing is hosted, which means it's a native Android app, but it's going to go to like a web view and do the web login process and then come back to your app using a callback. But there's also, more pure mobile approaches. There's this embedded version. There's an overlay version. So depending on your type of application, if you are mobile or if you're web or some other thing.
What would you use to choose between those, or why did you choose that one versus the other one?
I chose this one because the very first sample app that they give you is that way, and it's the most simple. I've also, the presentation did last year, I did the mobile ready, which I think they just called Locked. I think they've changed the name. But then it's more native, it's not going to WebView or things like that.
Just following on that question, there's also a draft from IETF that suggests that OAuth0 should be taken to another process. Shouldn't be done on your app. So you take it to the browser and then it brings you back through the callback. That's the
That may be more preferred.
that's the preferred way.
Okay.
It's more secure. You guys can search for Auth0 mobile IETF draft. IETF draft, and you should be able to find it.
Is that so that there's more credibility in
Security
your
as well.
security?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe that's why I also chose that. Let's kill this for a second and go to Android Studio. I think that'll be easier. So real-time demos are always great, right, John? Okay, let's show this phone on here. We use an app called, Chrome app called Visor. Has anybody used Visor before? It's pretty good. If I'm showing the right thing. Visor has stopped. But it hasn't really stopped. So there's the fancy, out of the box, you can download the sample app from their site. And that's just a simple image view, a button, and a text view, not logged in. So this is a native page, and this is in Java today. So show login. I've done, I need to explain what blockchain is, but so there's a sign up. If you want to do traditional username, password, or email password, you can configure that as well. Or you can choose several social logins. I've got 3 up there. So I'm going to log in with Google. And I've done this before. But it comes back and says, okay, logged in. I've already accepted. If I'd never done Google before, it would ask, does Google, do you trust this thing to be tied to your Google account? So I've gone through and logged in, and a token comes back from Auth0. And that token is something that you now can persist within your app for whatever time frame you want to. But this can be resubmitted to Auth0 for subsequent logins. So if they close this app and you say, it's going to be good for 7 days, they come back, and if there's the presence of a token, and you can send that back to Auth0, say, hey, this guy's got a token, is this still valid? Yes or no? Then they can come back and be logged in still. So that's the quick and dirty way. Oh, and if you notice, the screen right before this was a web view. It was their website hosted experience. Even that web view can be tailored to fit the style of your website as well. You can customize it. All right, so to create your own, it's a client basically. Okay, so to create your own client, I've created 2, and this was for a presentation last year. BOK actually stands for block, kind of, because I did a presentation that had to do with blockchain technology, this peer-to-peer thing. This presentation is not going to explain all about blockchain, but is kind of part of blockchain, and BOK also stands for body of knowledge. So the blockchain thing that I did was an e-voting app, and it used blockchain concepts for a single-use blockchain. And so I combined that with augmented reality as well for e-voting. People can see like candidates' dossiers and information up on a page and things. So I created these last year. I created a native one. So this is what I'm using for the Android and a regular web app. I also did a website login to prove that out as well for people to join this voting experience. And there's client IDs. These go inside of either your website backend or this ID, as you'll see later, that's inside of the Android app in the strings file. But to create your own client, it's pretty straightforward. It's a screenshot of one of their settings pages. You have a name of your app, and it'll create a domain for you, I think based on this name. And this will also be inside of your Android app. And then it'll generate a client ID, which will also be inside your app, both of these in the strings file. And it generates a client secret. And farther down, there's a place where you can define the callback URLs. It needs to know a hook to get back either to your web app or get back into your Android application and continue that process. So there's the style of the callback URL. You have some kind of a prefix. Demo is what the sample app comes with. It can have whatever scheme that you want. Domain is the one that it kind of generates for you when you sign up. And then your application package, this is for Android, and then callback. So this thing is inside of the settings for my application. So in the Java code, I can go into the code itself. I also took some screenshots. In the strings file, we've got two variables here that are housing those Auth0 pieces, the domain and that special token thing, or customer ID, that client ID. So yeah, that's the first Android change. There aren't very many things to do with this simple application in terms of adding it to your existing app. The other thing I did is added the Auth0 authentication library, and it threw some warnings because the custom tabs and app compat that are inside of here, some dependencies were older than my app was running. So I said, I want the newest ones, ignore the ones that are inside that library, and they always throw in JUnit. Inside the manifest, the only thing interesting here is the permission. Because we went to the internet to do that authentication exchange, you got to have the internet permission. So that's pretty it. That's all for that file. And this login view, that's pretty self-explanatory. We got the image view, the button, and a text view that gives you some status. If there's an error, or when you successfully logged in, it will show the token here. So that's just the out-of-the-box application. So if you can see this, this is more interesting. When you click that button, this is what their boilerplate code is for a simple login. See John smiling here. Is this RX Java stuff? Yeah. So you set the text, the token, this thing in purple, that token up there, that's the name of the text view at the bottom of the Android app. And then see the fourth line down, set OIDC conformant. There's a whole article that I learned that was new to me, but there's some conformancy that you can adhere to. I can show you the website for that. But that's optional. Usually it's false. Here they've set it to true. But really it's pretty simple. We create an Auth0 object, that third line, and then we have 3 different overrides once we've started. Actually, just above that list screen, that's where the demo prefix goes. And then the audience, this kind of defines what our domain is, so we know who we're authenticating against in the Auth0 system. That identifies my client app. And then there's a failure that shows a dialog. There's a failure if they have an exception. Otherwise, on success, you can do something. And all that's happening here is changing that text view and just say logging in. And then this special credentials object, you can do whatever you want to. Here, we're just showing the access token. And that's something that you'd want to persist and securely save if you want to save that. So I looked into the source of that credentials object. I cut it off here, but in the green, it has all the different pieces. There's expiration information. There's also a refresh token. If someone wants to keep their session alive, you can have a refresh token to stay authenticated. Then they had a note on their website about saving this token. Make sure you use a secure method to save the user's credentials. So in one of their apps, they save them as private mode in the shared preferences, and that's a very simple thing you can start with. They have a credentials, Auth0 provides a credentials manager object to help you do that. So they have some good documentation on their site for these pieces. So for that token that comes back, this is where you want to check when you restart the application, is this person logged in already, or do I need to show that login page once again? You can get that access token back out of the shared preferences or however you stored it, and you can check to see if it's null or not.
Also, if it's expired.
Or if it's expired. Here's a way to actually ping, did I cut that off? No. You can ping Auth0 and send them that token. Yeah, that second line down, access token. So when they start up again, the app, you pass that token if you have one, and you can get on success, that means they have a valid token and continue as normal. Otherwise, present the auth login again. Either it's expired or it's invalid or it's missing, whatever it may be. Any questions so far on this? Just kind of going pretty fast here, but you can also refresh their session. Yeah. And to do that, they have this renew auth, the second line down, a renew auth method. And you send a refresh token, which was inside that credentials object, to be able to refresh their session. Also I can show on the website, they have places where you can specify how long that session's good for, or that token. There's a lot of different parameters you can set. Also, in terms of logging out, they have on this credentials manager object again, you can delete the credentials that way. Or if you've saved their special credential objects or their token some other way, then it's up to you to go and delete it however you need to for your own custom needs. Yeah, I guess I could show this one too. Okay, this is the home page of Auth0. All right. Whoa. Just took it out. So there's my fancy login page for the web. And this is their sample content, just very basic. If you hit sign in, then it brings up this little authentication box, and you can choose, just like in the app, how to log in. And welcome, and it's plucked out my username. Because I went through Google, it knows my Google's username. So I could glean that from that interchange and continue on into the app and do whatever you need to do. All right. So in terms of pricing, what I've done is all just free stuff, and there's a few features that you get just by doing the free route. And I think it was 3 identity providers last year. But there's a lot to get started with, even just with their free account. Yes.
I'm assuming it provides hooks that you can then connect to your your enterprise backend. In
It
order.
does.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I can show that here in a minute too. Some of the hooks that they provide, like Salesforce or LDAP or whatever we have internally. Yeah. Okay, well, actually, let me just show that now. All right. So this was my blockchain app. So these are the two apps I created. The top one is the mobile app for Android. The bottom one was the regular web app and all their configuration settings. If I go through here, we can see allow callback URLs. It wraps, but I have two of them in here. One for the app that I did last year that has more features, but the very simple one that I downloaded recently, I just added that one as well, so they both work as far as callbacks. And that's pretty much it in terms of configuration. There's expiration numbers. If you need to reach out to other sites, cross-origin, allow logout URLs. You can customize the URLs that you use in your app. But over here on the left is pretty small. Let's see what we can do about that. I don't use Safari enough for zooming, but hooks is right here. They've got hooks for different. I created a new
Credentials
hook.
exchange. That's what I was. Yeah. Sweet.
So there's different hooks. Single sign-on integrations. If I click that, they work with several different providers for SSO. Connections, they have database connections. Social. So this is pretty easy just to add like Facebook or LinkedIn, Google. You just flip the switch here and you've got that enabled for your authentication needs, whether this is a website or an Android app. Facebook, for example, you have to go to Facebook or LinkedIn and create like an app on their system and get all their credentials, their app ID, plug them in here one time, and then you're good to go. You can turn it on, turn it off afterwards. The enterprise, there's LDAP, Active Directory, SharePoint, Office 365, etc. And passwordless, I haven't really delved into this, but there's other options here if that works for you. Users, you can see the different users that have come through if you've allowed it. They have JavaScript rules, multi-factor authentication. You can even do special email templates and things as part of your signing up or logging in process. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Okay. Samples and Q&A. So the last thing I'll show is their sample website or sample projects that they have. So each of those circles, several slides back, like Node.js or Android or Objective-C and Swift, they have pretty much sample projects for all of these different flavors of technologies. So you can start out of the gate and try it out in whatever technology swim lane you want to be in. Also, the one that I downloaded, when you go through that quick starts section in the documentation pages, they actually, in their sample apps, they pre-populate your client ID and your codes. So it's all wired up and configured for your app. And so it's pretty easy just to start right out of the gate. So, yeah. So hopefully that was interesting. I don't know if there are any other questions on this. Yeah.
Yeah, so you said they have your users, but they manage all of this, it sounds like.
They can.
So is there an option where I can say, I want to put this on my own server, or I want to?
Like LDAP or Exchange, you mean?
Well, my questions are like, how secure are they? What if I eventually find a service? How hard is it for me to get my clients out of there?
Oh, like migration,
Yeah.
exporting. I haven't looked into that.
Let me look at the brochure.
I don't know. I bet their brochures talk about that. But That's a good point. If you want to switch from one or from theirs to one of your own, I'm sure that's available. I look on here. So I had a few users, what were these, 6 months ago, 5 months ago? So there might be a way to export these. I'd have to look into that. I don't know. Reset. Yeah, you can block users so they can't come back into your application.
So it's a whole user management system.
They offer that if you want to.
Okay.
So they can do
What is the choices if you don't want that?
just authentication and they maybe,
Okay, with one of the other
right,
single sign-on or anything like that.
right,
Okay, I see.
right, yeah. Any other questions?
I guess that's how it would work. That's why I was asking the question, because we would need to use that hook where it says credential exchange, right? Because my APIs only knows my company's tokens,
Right.
right? I authenticate with Google, but I need to hit a service to exchange the credentials, get a token from Jive, so I can hit my APIs. So it wouldn't do any user management, we just do the authentication.
Yeah. So they keep growing, their features seem to keep growing, but especially if you want something quick, they have a lot of free features to have something up and running, and authentication really, you can delegate to this third party. Hopefully you trust them enough for this. That's always a question with these things, but they seem to have a lot of big customers and they're still around, so that's a good sign. But yeah, if there aren't any questions, thank you for being here.
All right, thanks, Mike.